At 4:47, on the morning of May 11, 1945, a Japanese sergeant named Fukutaro Mori crept through the darkness toward a small American tent. In his hand, he carried a sword that had been in his family for 3 generations. His mission was simple: kill the sleeping American inside without making a sound. What happened next would become one of the most unbelievable combat stories in the entire history of World War II. In exactly 30 minutes, a single American soldier would kill 56 Japanese attackers. Not with a machine gun, not with grenades, not with air support or artillery. With a rifle he swung like a baseball bat, and ammunition he scavenged from the bodies of men he had just killed. His name was John McKinney. He was 24 years old. He had a 3rd-grade education. He was a sharecropper's son from Georgia, who could barely read or write, and he was about to become the most lethal individual combatant of the Pacific War. But before we witness those 30 minutes of absolute carnage, we need to understand why this battle happened, who this farm boy really was, and why the Japanese made the catastrophic mistake of thinking he would be easy to kill. By May 1945, the Philippine campaign had become a meat grinder for both sides. The United States had already suffered over 60,000 casualties fighting across the islands. Luzon, the largest island in the Philippines, was supposed to fall quickly after American forces landed in January. Military planners predicted Japanese resistance would collapse within weeks. They were dead wrong. The Japanese Imperial Army had no intention of surrendering. General Yamashita Tomoyuki, the Tiger of Malaya, had dispersed his forces into the mountains and jungles of Luzon. His strategy was brutally simple: make the Americans pay for every inch of ground with blood, launch night attacks against isolated outposts, ambush supply convoys, strike hard, disappear into the jungle, strike again somewhere else. This guerrilla warfare was devastating American morale. Soldiers who survived the initial landing found themselves fighting an enemy they could rarely see. The Japanese would attack at night when American air superiority meant nothing. They would target small units' overrun positions before reinforcements could arrive, then vanish before dawn. Every night, American soldiers went to sleep, wondering if they would wake up to the sound of screaming and gunfire. Company A of the 123rd Infantry Regiment, 33rd Infantry Division, had been assigned to guard a crucial supply route near Dingalan Bay in Tayabas Province. The position was isolated. The nearest reinforcements were hours away. The company commander knew his men were vulnerable, but the supply route had to be protected. Without it, the entire northern offensive would stall. The Japanese knew about this outpost too. They had been watching it for days. Scout teams had counted the Americans, timed their guard rotations, identified the key defensive positions. Intelligence indicated approximately 40 American soldiers defended the perimeter. Standard night attack doctrine called for a 3-to-1 numerical advantage. The Japanese assembled over 100 soldiers from remnants of units still fighting on Luzon. They carried rifles, grenades, knee mortars, and swords. Their objective was total annihilation. Kill everyone. Capture the supplies. Disappear before American aircraft could respond at dawn. What the Japanese scouts did not account for was one specific soldier sleeping in a tent on the northeast perimeter. A quiet private who kept to himself, did his duty, and never complained. A man whose skills had been forged not in military training, but in the hard-scrabble survival of rural Georgia during the Great Depression. They did not know they were about to awaken something terrifying. John Robert McKinney was born in 1920 in Screven County, Georgia. His father was a sharecropper, which meant the family owned nothing. They worked land that belonged to someone else, kept a portion of whatever crops they managed to grow, and struggled to survive when the harvests failed. And in Depression era, Georgia harvests failed often. John was the oldest of several children. There was no money for school beyond the basics. By the time he was 8 years old, he could read simple words and write his name. That was the extent of his formal education. What he learned instead was how to survive. His father gave him a rifle when he was 6. Not a toy. A real weapon. In rural Georgia, a rifle meant food on the table. Young John learned to shoot squirrels and rabbits before he learned multiplication. By age 12, he could hit a squirrel at 50 yards with a worn-out .22 caliber rifle that kicked like a mule and had sights so damaged most shooters could not hit a barn door. The Georgia woods became his classroom. He learned to move silently through underbrush because a snapping twig meant a deer would bolt and the family would go hungry. He learned to track animals by the smallest signs because finding game before it found you was the difference between eating and starving. He learned patience because sometimes you had to wait for hours in the cold and wet before the perfect shot presented itself. Most importantly, he learned that hesitation meant failure. When a deer appeared in your sights, you had perhaps 2 seconds to make the shot. Think too long, and the animal would sense danger and disappear. Pull the trigger too quickly, and you would miss. The perfect shot required instant calculation of distance, movement, wind, and trajectory, followed by immediate execution. No second chances, no do-overs. These were not military skills. They were survival skills, but they would translate into something deadly when applied to combat. John enlisted at Fort McPherson in November 1942. He was 22 years old. The Army administered its standard battery of tests and discovered 2 things about Private McKinney. First, he could barely read or write. His scores on written examinations were among the lowest in his training class. Second, his marksmanship scores were among the highest the testing officers had ever seen. Drill sergeants noticed something else during training. McKinney moved differently than other soldiers. In field exercises, he seemed to glide through terrain that tripped up his peers. He appeared in positions that should have been impossible to reach undetected. His instructors recognized the movements of a natural hunter, someone who had spent decades learning to become invisible in the woods. The 33rd Infantry Division shipped to the Pacific in 1943. McKinney fought through New Guinea, survived malaria, survived dysentery, survived everything the jungle and the Japanese threw at him. By May 1945, he was a seasoned combat veteran. His fellow soldiers knew 2 things about John McKinney. He was the best shot in the company, and he slept with his rifle within arm's reach. Always. That rifle was an M1 Garand, 8 rounds in an internal magazine, semi-automatic fire, effective range over 400 yards in the hands of an expert. In McKinney's hands, it was something more. It was an extension of every hunting skill he had developed since childhood. It was the tool that would make him legendary. On the night of May 10, 1945, McKinney finished a long shift manning one of the perimeter machine guns. He was exhausted. The humid Philippine air made sleep difficult, but he needed rest. He walked the short distance to his tent, lay down on his cot with his M1 Garand beside him, and closed his eyes. Outside, the jungle was quiet. Too quiet, perhaps, but McKinney was too tired to notice. 100 yards away, Sergeant Fukutaro Mori and the advance element of the Japanese attack force were already inside the American perimeter. They had slipped past the outer guard posts in complete silence. Mori's orders were specific. Eliminate the first Americans without gunfire. Swords and bayonets only. By the time the main assault began, the perimeter would already be compromised. Mori approached McKinney's tent. He could hear the American breathing inside. One quick strike would end this man's life, then on to the next tent, then the machine gun position, then the command post. Simple, efficient, deadly. At 4:51 a.m., Mori threw open the tent flap. His sword came down in a diagonal slash aimed at McKinney's neck, but in the darkness, he misjudged the distance. The blade caught McKinney on the side of his head, instead severing part of his right ear. Blood sprayed across the canvas. What happened in the next fraction of a second would determine whether McKinney lived or died, whether Company A survived or was annihilated. Whether 56 Japanese soldiers would return to their commanders as conquering heroes or be left as corpses scattered across the Philippine jungle. McKinney's eyes snapped open to searing pain and the silhouette of a man standing over him with a raised sword. He had less than 1 second to react. Mori was already bringing the blade down for a second strike. This one would not miss. 24 years of survival instinct took over. McKinney's hand found his rifle in the darkness. He did not aim. He did not think. He swung the M1 like a club with every ounce of strength in his body. The rifle butt caught Mori under the chin with enough force to shatter bone. The Japanese sergeant staggered backward. McKinney swung again. The second blow crushed Mori's skull. Outside the tent, McKinney could hear them. Footsteps. Dozens of footsteps moving fast through the camp. Screaming. Gunfire. The main assault had begun. He was bleeding badly from his ear. His head was ringing from the sword strike. And somewhere in the darkness, nearly 100 Japanese soldiers were coming to kill everyone he knew. Private John McKinney grabbed his rifle and stepped out of the tent. The machine gun position was 30 yards away. 3 Americans had been manning it when McKinney went to rest. Now he could see muzzle flashes in the darkness, figures struggling around the gun pit, the distinctive crack of Japanese rifles mixing with American weapons. The position was being overrun. McKinney understood the tactical situation instantly. The machine gun was the key to the entire defense. If the Japanese captured it and turned it around, they could rake the entire American perimeter with fire. Every soldier in Company A would die. He started running toward the gun. 10 Japanese soldiers reached the position before he could get there. They swarmed over the sandbag walls. One immediately began trying to turn the weapon around. The others took defensive positions, rifles pointed outward. McKinney did not slow down. He did not take cover. He did not wait for backup. He sprinted directly at 10 enemy soldiers who had just captured the most important weapon in the entire outpost. 2 of them raised their rifles. McKinney was faster. He shot the first man at 15 yards, shot the second at 10. By the time he reached the sandbags, he had fired 4 rounds. 4 Japanese soldiers were down. He leaped into the gun pit. The space was roughly 8 feet by 6 feet. 6 enemy soldiers were still alive in that confined area. Some tried to swing their rifles around. Others reached for bayonets. One was still fumbling with the machine gun. McKinney landed among them and kept firing. Point-blank range. 3 more shots. 3 more bodies. 1 round left. The 8th man lunged at him with a bayonet. McKinney fired his last round. The soldier dropped. The M1 Garand's bolt locked back on an empty magazine with its distinctive metallic ping. 3 Japanese soldiers were still alive in the gun pit. They heard that sound. They knew what it meant. McKinney reversed his grip on the rifle before the empty clip finished ejecting. He swung the weapon like an axe. The walnut stock connected with the first soldier's temple. The man collapsed. McKinney swung again. The second soldier tried to block. The rifle butt shattered his forearm and continued into his skull. The third lunged with a bayonet. McKinney sidestepped and brought the rifle down on the back of the man's neck. Vertebrae cracked. 10 Japanese soldiers had captured the machine gun. 30 seconds later, all 10 were dead. McKinney grabbed the machine gun's receiver. Something was wrong. During the struggle, the weapon had been damaged. The bolt was jammed. The feed tray was bent. He tried cycling the charging handle. Nothing. The most important weapon in the perimeter was now useless. Dawn was beginning to lighten the eastern horizon. In that gray light, McKinney could see them. More Japanese soldiers, many more. They were regrouping at the edge of the jungle, preparing for the next wave. He had an M1 rifle with an empty magazine. He had just killed 10 men in hand-to-hand combat. His ear was still bleeding, and the main assault had not even started yet. McKinney reached down and pulled ammunition from one of the dead Japanese soldiers. American .30 caliber rounds the man had probably taken from a previous engagement. He loaded a fresh clip into his rifle. Somewhere in the darkness, a Japanese officer was shouting orders. McKinney could not understand the words, but he understood the tone. They were coming again. He settled into the gun pit among the bodies of the men he had just killed, rested his rifle on the sandbag wall, and waited. What followed would be 30 minutes of uninterrupted combat that military historians still struggle to explain. One man against nearly 100 attackers, wave after wave of Japanese infantry charging his position. McKinney moving constantly, killing relentlessly, refusing to die despite wounds that should have incapacitated him. But that is a story for part 2, because what you have just witnessed was merely the beginning. The first 10 kills, the first 2 minutes of a half-hour nightmare that would leave 56 Japanese soldiers dead and transform an illiterate farm boy from Georgia into one of the most decorated heroes of World War II. In part 2, we will see how McKinney survived the mortar bombardment that should have killed him, how he charged directly into enemy fire not once but 3 times, how he fought hand-to-hand against multiple attackers until his rifle stock cracked from the repeated impacts against human skulls. And we will witness the moment when the surviving Japanese soldiers finally realized the horrifying truth. They were not fighting a man. They were fighting something else entirely. In part 1, we witnessed Private John McKinney wake up to a Japanese sword slashing his ear. We watched him crush his attacker's skull with a rifle butt. We saw him sprint toward a captured machine gun position and kill 10 enemy soldiers in 30 seconds. But that was just the opening act. The real nightmare was about to begin. When we left McKinney, he was settling into a gun pit filled with the bodies of men he had just killed. Dawn was breaking over the Philippine jungle, and nearly 90 Japanese soldiers were regrouping at the edge of the trees, preparing to finish what they started. Here is a statistic that should make your blood run cold. In the next 28 minutes, John McKinney would engage in continuous combat against wave after wave of attackers. He would fire over 100 rounds. He would fight hand-to-hand at least 4 more times. He would change positions 6 times under direct fire. And he would kill 46 more men. This is where the story stops being impressive and starts being impossible. The second wave emerged from the jungle 60 yards from McKinney's position. He counted at least 20 soldiers in the first line with more behind them. They came at a dead run, rifles with fixed bayonets extended, screaming as they charged. The Japanese expected to find their comrades manning a captured machine gun. Instead, they found one American waiting for them with a semi-automatic rifle and absolutely no intention of dying. McKinney put his front sight on the lead soldier and squeezed the trigger. The M1 Garand was designed for rapid-aimed fire. A trained soldier could put 8 rounds downrange in 10 seconds. McKinney was not a trained soldier. He was a hunter who had been shooting since childhood. He was faster. The first Japanese soldier dropped at 60 yards. McKinney shifted aim. The second man fell, then the third. The M1 kicked against his shoulder with each shot. Brass casings ejected to his right. He did not think about what he was doing. His body remembered thousands of hours in the Georgia woods. Lead the target. Squeeze. Acquire. Repeat. The clip ejected with a ping. McKinney slammed in a fresh one from the bandolier he had scavenged. The charging wave had covered 20 yards during his reload, 40 yards now. He started firing again. The Japanese soldiers in the second wave had expected to overrun a defensive position in chaos. Instead, they were being cut down with mechanical precision by a single rifleman who seemed incapable of missing. 8 rounds. Reload. 8 rounds. Reload. Some attackers made it to within 15 yards before McKinney dropped them. Others tried to veer left or right seeking cover. He tracked them and fired. A soldier who moved was easier to hit than a soldier who stood still. McKinney had learned that hunting deer. Now he was applying the same principle to human beings. The second wave broke. The survivors scattered back toward the jungle. McKinney counted the bodies in front of his position. 11 more dead. 21 total since the attack began. He did not have time to feel relief. Japanese officers were already reorganizing. He could hear them shouting beyond the tree line, and then he heard something else, a hollow thump from somewhere in the jungle. Then another. Knee mortars. The first round exploded 10 yards to his left. Dirt and shrapnel sprayed across the gun pit. McKinney flattened himself against the sandbags. The second round hit closer. The third landed directly on the parapet, showering him with debris. The Japanese had learned from the first two waves. They were not going to charge blindly into his rifle fire again. They would soften his position with mortars first, kill him or force him to keep his head down, then send in the infantry. McKinney understood the tactical problem immediately. If he stayed in the gun pit, the mortars would eventually find him. The Japanese gunners were adjusting their aim with each shot, walking the impacts closer and closer. But if he moved, he would lose the only fortified position in this section of the perimeter. A grenade landed 3 feet away from him. McKinney grabbed it and threw it back over the sandbags. It exploded in midair. The blast wave knocked him sideways. His ears were ringing. Blood from his severed ear had soaked through the makeshift bandage he had pressed against the wound. Another mortar round hit the sandbags directly. The wall partially collapsed. McKinney was now half exposed to the jungle. He made his decision. Staying meant death. He grabbed 2 bandoliers of ammunition from the dead soldiers around him, slung them over his shoulder, and ran. The Japanese saw him moving. Rifle fire cracked from the tree line. Bullets snapped past his head. McKinney sprinted 15 yards to a shallow depression in the ground. Not a proper foxhole, just a slight dip in the terrain. He threw himself into it and rolled onto his back. Rounds kicked up dirt inches from his face. He crawled to the edge of the depression. Found a firing position. The Japanese infantry was moving again. They thought he was running. They thought he was retreating. 2 squads emerged from the jungle at a fast walk. Rifles ready, moving toward the abandoned gun pit. McKinney let them get to 30 yards. Then he opened fire. The attackers had bunched together while crossing open ground. A fatal mistake. McKinney's first shot dropped the point man. His second hit the soldier directly behind. The group scattered, but there was no cover between the jungle and McKinney's new position. He picked them off as they ran. 8 rounds. Reload. The survivors reached the gun pit and found only bodies, their comrades from the first wave. They had expected to find the American there. Instead, they found him shooting at them from a completely different angle. 3 more fell before they could locate his muzzle flash. McKinney changed position again. He moved 10 yards to his right while the Japanese tried to reorganize. Found another depression. Started firing from the new location. He was doing what he had done in the Georgia woods. Never stay in one place. Never let your target predict where the next shot will come from. A deer that hears 1 gunshot will freeze. A deer that hears 2 from different locations will run in circles. The Japanese were running in circles. 11 minutes into the attack. McKinney had killed or wounded at least 30 enemy soldiers. But he knew the math was not in his favor. The Japanese had started with roughly 100 men. Even if half were down, that left 50. And he was still alone. His ammunition was running low. His ear was still bleeding. And the mortar fire was resuming, trying to pin down his new position. He needed more ammunition. And he knew exactly where to find it. The dead Japanese soldiers around the gun pit carried ammunition pouches. Some had grenades. McKinney waited for a lull in the mortar fire. Counted to 3. Then sprinted across the open ground toward the gun pit. Rifle fire erupted from the tree line. McKinney ran in a zigzag pattern. A bullet tugged at his sleeve. Another cracked past his ear, the one that was still intact. He dove the last 5 feet and landed among the bodies he had created minutes earlier. The smell hit him immediately. Blood and cordite and the copper tang of death. McKinney ignored it. He had butchered hogs on the farm. Gutted deer in the Georgia heat. The smell of death was familiar. He moved quickly through the bodies. Grabbed every bandolier he could find. Every loose clip. He found 4 American ammunition pouches on Japanese soldiers who had probably taken them as trophies from previous engagements. 64 more rounds. He stuffed the clips into his pockets and belt. A Japanese soldier appeared over the sandbag wall. He must have crawled forward while McKinney was gathering ammunition. The man's rifle was already coming up. McKinney shot him through the chest at 2 feet. He grabbed the dead man's grenades. 3 of them. Japanese Type 97 fragmentation grenades. He had never used one before, but he knew how they worked. Pull the pin. Strike the cap against something hard. Count to 4. Throw. Movement in his peripheral vision. More soldiers approaching from the left. McKinney armed a grenade, counted, threw it over the sandbags. The explosion was followed by screaming. He armed the second grenade, threw it toward the tree line where muzzle flashes were concentrated. More screaming. He was out of the gun pit before the third grenade left his hand. Running again. New position. Keep moving. The sky was light enough now to see clearly. McKinney found a shell crater 15 yards from his previous depression, dropped into it. The crater was 3 feet deep enough cover to protect him from direct fire. He could see the entire approach from the jungle to the perimeter. Bodies littered the ground between his position and the trees. He counted quickly. 28, maybe 30. Some were still moving. Wounded men trying to crawl back toward their lines. McKinney let them go. A wounded man required 2 healthy soldiers to carry him. Every casualty he created multiplied the enemy's problems. The mortar fire had stopped. McKinney understood why. The Japanese had lost visual contact with him. Their mortar crews could not adjust fire on a target they could not see. He used the time to reload every empty clip he carried. His fingers worked automatically. Press the rounds into the clip. Feel for the spring tension. 8 rounds per clip. He had scavenged enough ammunition for approximately 10 reloads. 80 rounds. 80 rounds against however many Japanese soldiers were still in that jungle. The attack had lasted 14 minutes. McKinney had killed or wounded at least 35 enemy soldiers. But he knew the assault was far from over. The Japanese commander would not accept defeat, not against one man. The next wave would be different. Smarter. More dangerous. And McKinney was right. The Japanese soldiers stopped attacking in waves. They began advancing individually. One man would move while others provided covering fire. Then another man would move. Leapfrogging forward, closing the distance yard by yard. It was a tactic designed to overwhelm a single defender. Even the best marksman could not track multiple targets moving at different times from different directions. Eventually, someone would get close enough. McKinney recognized what they were doing. He had hunted animals that used similar tactics. A pack of coyotes would spread out and approach prey from multiple angles. The prey could only watch one threat at a time. The others would close in. He was the prey now. 22 minutes. The Japanese had closed to within 20 yards on the southern approach, 15 yards on the northeast. McKinney had fewer than 30 rounds remaining. The foxhole that had protected him was about to become his grave, unless he changed the equation. McKinney burst out of the foxhole and charged directly at the nearest group of Japanese soldiers. 5 men were crouched behind a fallen palm tree 15 yards to the northeast. They had been waiting for their comrades to close from the other side. They did not expect their target to attack. McKinney shot the first man while still running, shot the second as he reached the log. The third soldier rose to meet him with a bayonet thrust. McKinney sidestepped and slammed his rifle butt into the man's face. Bone crunched. The soldier went down. The fourth man swung his rifle like a club. McKinney ducked under the blow and drove the steel butt plate of his M1 into the soldier's throat. The fifth man tried to run. McKinney shot him in the back at 3 yards. He kept moving. Could not stop. Stopping meant death. The southern group had seen him leave the foxhole. They were sprinting toward his position. McKinney turned and fired. 2 men dropped. The others kept coming. He fired again. Another man fell. The M1 pinged empty. 3 Japanese soldiers reached him before he could reload. The first one tackled him around the waist. McKinney went down hard. His rifle flew from his hands. The second soldier stomped on his wounded ear. Pain exploded through his skull. The third raised a bayonet for a killing thrust. McKinney grabbed the ankle of the man standing on his head and twisted. The soldier lost his balance and fell. McKinney rolled, throwing off the man who had tackled him. The bayonet thrust missed his chest by inches and buried itself in the dirt. He scrambled to his knees, found his rifle, swung it in a wide arc that caught one soldier across the temple. The man collapsed. McKinney reversed the swing and drove the butt plate into another soldier's ribs. He felt bones break under the impact. The third soldier had pulled his bayonet from the ground. He lunged. McKinney blocked the thrust with his rifle barrel. The blade slid along the wood and steel, gouging a furrow in the stock. McKinney stepped inside the man's reach and headbutted him. The soldier staggered. McKinney hit him twice more with the rifle butt. He stopped moving. 24 minutes since the attack began. McKinney was breathing hard. His hands were slick with blood. Some of it was his own. His ear was a mass of torn flesh and dried gore. His uniform was ripped in a dozen places. He had bruises and cuts he did not remember receiving. But he was still alive, still standing, still fighting. He looked around the battlefield. Bodies everywhere. Japanese soldiers who had come to kill Americans and found something they had not expected. More bodies than he could count in the gray morning light. Movement to his right. 2 more soldiers emerging from the jungle. McKinney raised his rifle and realized it was empty. He had not reloaded after the hand-to-hand fighting. The 2 soldiers saw him standing among the bodies of their comrades. They hesitated. McKinney charged them. He covered 10 yards before they could react. The first soldier tried to bring his rifle up. Too slow. McKinney's rifle butt caught him under the chin. The second soldier turned to run. McKinney chased him down in 3 strides and clubbed him from behind. 25 minutes. McKinney remembered the mortar position. He had seen muzzle flashes from the southwest throughout the battle. The knee mortars had been pounding his positions repeatedly. Taking out those crews would eliminate the indirect fire threat. He found a loaded rifle among the dead, an M1 with a full clip, picked it up, dropped his damaged weapon with its cracked stock, started moving toward the mortar position. The mortar crews saw him coming. 2 men. They had been adjusting their weapon for another fire mission. Now they scrambled to defend themselves. One reached for a rifle. The other tried to arm a grenade. McKinney shot them both from 45 yards. 26 minutes. He stood in the morning light scanning the jungle for more targets. His chest heaved. His vision was blurring from exhaustion and blood loss. Every muscle in his body screamed for rest. The jungle was quiet. No more soldiers emerging from the trees. No more mortar rounds. No more rifle fire from concealed positions. Just the moans of wounded men and the buzzing of flies already gathering on the dead. McKinney walked back toward the American perimeter. He was halfway there when he saw figures moving toward him. American uniforms. Soldiers from Company A who had finally fought through to his section of the line. They stopped when they saw him, covered in blood, carrying a rifle that was not his own, surrounded by bodies. McKinney lowered his weapon. The reinforcements stared at the carnage around him, at the shattered machine gun position, at the scattered corpses stretching from the jungle to the perimeter. 30 minutes after Sergeant Fukutaro Mori slashed open his tent, Private John McKinney was still standing, still breathing, still in complete control of the area. The battle was over. But no one yet understood what had actually happened. No one yet grasped that they were looking at the aftermath of the most devastating individual combat performance in the entire Pacific War. The platoon sergeant ordered a body count. His men moved through the battlefield, checking corpses marking positions. The count took 20 minutes. When they finished, the sergeant did not believe the number. He ordered them to count again. 56 dead Japanese soldiers lay in the area McKinney had defended. 56 confirmed kills in 30 minutes. 1 rifleman against nearly 100 attackers. It was not possible. It could not be real. But it was. And now the real question emerged. Who was this man? How had he done what no one believed could be done? And what would happen when the military brass learned that an illiterate farm boy from Georgia had just single-handedly saved an entire company? In Part 3, we will follow McKinney through the aftermath. We will witness the investigation that verified every impossible detail of his story. We will see the recommendation for the Medal of Honor move through channels, while officers at every level questioned whether the report was exaggerated. And we will discover the tragic truth about what combat of this intensity does to a human being. Because John McKinney survived that morning in the Philippines, but part of him never came home. In Part 1, we watched John McKinney wake up to a Japanese sword slashing his ear. We saw him kill his attacker with a rifle butt and sprint toward a captured machine gun position. In Part 2, we witnessed 30 minutes of continuous combat that defied all logic. Wave after wave of Japanese attackers, hand-to-hand fighting, mortar bombardment. And through it all, one man from Georgia who refused to die. When the smoke cleared, 56 Japanese soldiers lay dead across the battlefield. One American rifleman had single-handedly repelled an attack by nearly 100 enemy troops. But here is what nobody expected. When the official report reached headquarters, nobody believed it. The soldiers who reached McKinney that morning were from 2nd Platoon. They had been fighting on the western edge of the perimeter when the Japanese attack hit. It took them 30 minutes to push through to McKinney's position. What they found when they arrived defied comprehension. Bodies lay scattered across an area roughly 100 yards long and 60 yards wide. Japanese soldiers slumped over sandbags, crumpled in shell craters, sprawled among supply crates, piled on top of each other near the damaged machine gun emplacement. The platoon sergeant had seen combat before. He had witnessed the aftermath of firefights across New Guinea and the Philippines. He had never seen anything like this. He ordered a body count. His men moved through the battlefield, checking corpses, marking positions with stakes and string. The count took 20 minutes. When they finished, the sergeant looked at the number and shook his head. He ordered them to count again. The second count matched the first. 56 confirmed dead within the immediate area McKinney had defended. 56 Japanese soldiers killed by one American in 30 minutes. The sergeant found McKinney sitting on an ammunition crate near the shattered gun pit. The private was pressing a blood-soaked rag against what remained of his right ear. His uniform was torn and stained with gore. His rifle stock was cracked from repeated impacts against human skulls. He looked like a man who had crawled out of hell. The sergeant asked what happened. McKinney gave a brief account. The tent, the sword, the machine gun. The waves of attackers. He spoke in short sentences, no embellishment, no drama, just facts delivered in a flat Georgia drawl. The sergeant did not believe him. No single soldier could kill 56 men in 30 minutes. It was impossible. There must have been other defenders, other riflemen supporting McKinney's position. The private was confused from blood loss and combat stress. The numbers had to be wrong. But the other soldiers in Company A had been accounted for. The two men who originally manned the machine gun with McKinney had evacuated to the rear with wounds early in the fight. Everyone else had been fighting on different sections of the perimeter. McKinney had been alone. Company A's commanding officer forwarded a report to battalion headquarters. Battalion forwarded it to regiment. Regiment forwarded it to division. At each level, officers read the account and assumed it was exaggerated. Combat reports often inflated enemy casualties. Soldiers under stress made mistakes in counting. Men who survived intense firefights sometimes remembered events differently than they actually occurred. The numbers in the McKinney report were so extreme that senior officers dismissed them as impossible. Division headquarters sent back a terse response. Verify the claim. Provide corroborating evidence. Interview witnesses. Until then, the report would be filed as unconfirmed. This is where the story could have ended. An incredible act of heroism dismissed as wartime exaggeration. A farm boy's sacrifice forgotten in the chaos of the Philippine campaign. The military bureaucracy had seen hundreds of inflated reports. They had no reason to believe this one was different. But someone at 33rd Infantry Division headquarters decided to investigate properly. The division intelligence team arrived at Company A's position 3 days after the attack. They brought cameras measuring equipment and detailed questionnaires. Their job was to determine exactly what had happened on the morning of May 11th and whether the extraordinary claims in the official report could be verified. The lead investigator was a captain who had spent 2 years analyzing combat reports across the Pacific Theater. He had learned to identify exaggeration, to spot inconsistencies, to separate genuine heroism from wartime myth. He approached the McKinney case with professional skepticism. That skepticism lasted approximately 45 minutes. The first thing the investigators did was walk the battlefield. The bodies had been buried by then, but the positions were marked. Spent brass casings still littered the ground. Bloodstains darkened the soil. The damaged machine gun sat where McKinney had left it, bolt-jammed, feed tray bent. The captain counted the shell casings. He mapped their locations against McKinney's account of his movements. The private had described starting at the gun pit, then moving to a depression 15 yards away, then to a shell crater, then back to the gun pit for ammunition, then to multiple other positions as the fight progressed. The brass casings confirmed every movement. Clusters of 8 appeared at each location McKinney had described. The trajectory of impacts on trees and sandbags matched the angles from those firing positions. The physical evidence supported the account exactly. Next came the witness interviews. The investigators spoke with every soldier in Company A who had been present during the attack. They interviewed the 2 wounded men who had evacuated from the machine gun position. They questioned soldiers who had been fighting on other sections of the perimeter. The testimonies were consistent. Multiple witnesses reported hearing intense rifle fire from the northeast perimeter throughout the battle. They described seeing muzzle flashes from different positions as McKinney moved. One soldier reported counting at least 50 shots from that sector during the 30-minute engagement. The investigators examined the Japanese casualties through after-action intelligence. Some bodies had been recovered before burial for document and equipment analysis. The wounds told a story. Clean rifle shots to the chest and head at ranges from 5 to 60 yards. Crushing trauma to skulls consistent with blunt force impact. Bayonet wounds on American equipment matching defensive struggles at close range. The captain reviewed the evidence for 3 days. He interviewed McKinney twice, pressing for details, looking for inconsistencies. The private's account never changed. Every detail matched the physical evidence. On the 4th day, the captain wrote his report. His conclusion was unequivocal. The original account was accurate. Private John McKinney had single-handedly killed 56 Japanese soldiers in approximately 30 minutes of combat. He had saved his company from potential annihilation through an act of individual heroism that exceeded anything in the captain's experience. The report went back up the chain of command. This time, it included photographs of the battlefield diagrams of McKinney's movements, witness statements, and ballistic analysis. The evidence was overwhelming. The recommendation for the Medal of Honor was prepared in June 1945. The Medal of Honor is the highest military decoration awarded by the United States government. Fewer than 3,500 have been presented since the Civil War. The criteria are specific and demanding. The recipient must have distinguished himself conspicuously by gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. McKinney's actions exceeded those criteria by any measure the review board could apply. The paperwork moved through channels. War Department reviewers examined the evidence. They consulted with the intelligence officers who had conducted the investigation. They reviewed the witness statements. They studied the battlefield diagrams. Every reviewer reached the same conclusion. The story was true. Every detail was supported by physical evidence and corroborating testimony. Private John McKinney had done exactly what the reports claimed. The approval came in early autumn 1945. The war was over by then. Japan had surrendered in August. The fighting that had consumed McKinney's world had finally ended, but the bureaucracy of recognition continued grinding forward. On January 23, 1946, Private John McKinney stood in the White House. President Harry Truman placed a Medal of Honor around his neck. The citation described his actions in formal military language, extreme gallantry and intrepidity above and beyond the call of duty, single-handedly thwarting an assault that threatened to annihilate his company, killing approximately 50 enemy soldiers through a combination of accurate rifle fire and close combat. The official count in the citation was conservative. Some accounts suggested the actual number exceeded 70, but 56 could be verified with absolute certainty. 56 men killed by one soldier in half an hour. McKinney did not give speeches at the ceremony. He did not seek publicity afterward. When reporters asked about the battle, he gave the same brief answers he had given the sergeant that morning on Luzon. The tent, the sword, the machine gun, the waves of attackers. He seemed uncomfortable with the attention. He wanted to go home. The press called him the Pacific's Audie Murphy. Murphy had received his Medal of Honor for single-handedly holding off German forces in France. McKinney had done something similar against Japanese forces in the Philippines. Both men had faced overwhelming odds. Both had refused to retreat. Both had emerged victorious through skill, courage, and something that defied easy explanation. But while Murphy became a movie star after the war, McKinney went home to Georgia. He was 25 years old. He had a Medal of Honor, a third-grade education, and a partially severed ear that would never fully heal. The war was over. The killing was done. The military estimated that McKinney's defense of the northeast perimeter prevented the complete overrun of Company A. If the machine gun had been captured and turned on, the sleeping Americans' casualties could have exceeded 30 dead. The supply route would have been cut. The entire northern offensive might have stalled for weeks while new defensive positions were established. One man, 30 minutes. The fate of a company and possibly an entire operation hanging in the balance. The 33rd Infantry Division's after-action report noted that Japanese forces in the Dingalan Bay area ceased offensive operations for 2 weeks following the failed attack. The remnants of the assault force retreated into the mountains and never regrouped in significant numbers. The supply route remained open. The offensive continued on schedule. McKinney's stand had broken the back of Japanese resistance in that sector. But the question that haunted everyone who reviewed the case remained unanswered. How had he done it? How had one man with a rifle killed 56 trained soldiers in 30 minutes? The investigators could verify what happened. They could not explain why it was possible. The answer lay somewhere in the Georgia woods. In thousands of hours of hunting that had wired McKinney's reflexes for instant target acquisition. In a childhood of poverty that had taught him that hesitation meant hunger. In survival instincts so deeply ingrained that conscious thought became unnecessary. John McKinney had not fought like a soldier that morning. He had fought like a predator. And the Japanese had been his prey. In Part 4, we will follow McKinney home to Georgia. We will see what happened to the man behind the Medal of Honor in the decades after the war. We will discover the nightmares that followed him from Luzon, the quiet life he built far from the spotlight, the recognition that came too late. And we will learn the tragic truth that every combat veteran understands. You can survive the battle and still lose part of yourself forever. The final chapter of John McKinney's story is waiting. And it may be the most important part of all. In Part 1, we watched a Japanese sergeant slash John McKinney's ear with a sword at 4:51 in the morning. We saw a sharecropper's son from Georgia crush his attacker's skull and sprint into the darkness to save his company. In Part 2, we witnessed 30 minutes of continuous combat that killed 56 enemy soldiers. In Part 3, we followed the investigation that verified every impossible detail of that morning. Now comes the final chapter. The one that nobody talks about. The one that reveals what happens to a man after he becomes a legend. Because John McKinney survived the Battle of Dingalan Bay. He received the Medal of Honor from President Truman. He became one of the most decorated soldiers of the Pacific War. And then he disappeared. Not literally. He went home to Scriven County, Georgia. He married. He raised a family. He worked various jobs around the rural community where he had grown up hunting squirrels and trapping rabbits. But the man who returned from the Philippines was not the same man who had left. The nightmares started almost immediately. His family learned to recognize the sounds. The sudden gasps in the middle of the night. The thrashing. The way he would wake up reaching for a rifle that was not there. Sometimes he would shout in his sleep. Words that made no sense to his wife and children. Commands. Warnings. The sounds of a man still fighting a battle that had ended years ago. Post-traumatic stress disorder was not a recognized diagnosis in 1946. Soldiers who struggled with combat memories were told to forget about it. Move on. Be grateful they survived. The Veterans Administration offered little help for invisible wounds. Men like McKinney were expected to simply return to normal life as if nothing had happened. McKinney did what most veterans of his generation did. He buried the memories. He worked. He kept to himself. He never talked about the war unless directly asked, and even then, his answers were brief. The tent, the sword, the machine gun. Always the same words, always delivered in that flat Georgia drawl that revealed nothing of the horror behind them. His neighbors in Scriven County knew he had received the Medal of Honor. Some had seen the newspaper articles from 1946, but McKinney never brought it up. He never displayed the medal. He never attended reunions or gave interviews to military historians. When veterans organizations invited him to speak at ceremonies, he politely declined. The medal sat in a drawer somewhere, the highest military decoration the nation could bestow, tucked away like an old photograph too painful to look at. Years passed. Korea came and went. Vietnam came and went. New wars created new heroes and new veterans with their own buried memories. The world moved on. John McKinney remained in Georgia, quietly living, quietly, aging, quietly, carrying a weight that no one around him fully understood. He worked as a farmer for a while, then other jobs. Nothing glamorous. Nothing that suggested he had once killed 56 men in half an hour. To his neighbors, he was just John, a quiet man who kept to himself, good with a rifle, friendly enough when you talked to him, not the type to draw attention. But the dishonor of what he had done extended far beyond Scriven County. The Medal of Honor citation became part of military history. His name appeared in training manuals as an example of individual combat effectiveness under extreme conditions. Analysts studied his movements, his tactics, his ability to maintain combat effectiveness while wounded and outnumbered. What they found challenged conventional military thinking. McKinney had not followed standard infantry doctrine. He had not established a defensive position and held it. Instead, he had moved constantly engaging from multiple angles, never allowing the enemy to fix his position. He had attacked when defense seemed impossible. He had used terrain and movement in ways that multiplied his effectiveness against superior numbers. Military theorists recognized something in McKinney's instinctive tactics that would later be formalized in special operations training. The principles of shoot and move, of using aggression as defense, of disrupting enemy coordination through unpredictable action. McKinney had never read a tactics manual. He had simply fought the way he had learned to hunt in the Georgia woods. The lessons from Dingle Bay influenced infantry training for decades. The idea that a single well-positioned rifleman could hold ground against overwhelming numbers if he maintained mobility and fire discipline became part of defensive doctrine. McKinney's fight was studied at Fort Benning. Cadets learned about the sharecropper's son, who had proven that courage and skill could overcome impossible odds. But the man himself wanted nothing to do with any of it. When researchers contacted him for interviews, he gave brief answers and changed the subject. When the Army invited him to speak at training facilities, he declined. The hero of Dingle Bay had no interest in being a hero. His fellow Medal of Honor recipients understood. Many of them struggled with the same burden. The medal honored their actions, but also marked them as different, set apart, expected to be something more than ordinary men. Some embraced that role. Others, like McKinney, simply wanted to be left alone. The decades rolled by. McKinney grew old in the same county where he had grown up. His children raised their own families. His grandchildren knew their grandfather had done something important in the war, but the details remained vague. He was just Grandpa, a quiet man who liked to hunt and fish, who told stories about the old days in Georgia, who almost never talked about the Philippines. In 1965, a veteran and author named Forrest Bryant Johnson began researching McKinney's story. Johnson understood what McKinney had experienced. He approached the project with respect for the man's privacy while recognizing the historical importance of the account. He spent years tracking down witnesses, examining military records, piecing together the details of those 30 minutes on Luzon. The research was difficult. McKinney did not want to talk. Many witnesses had died. Military records were scattered across multiple archives. But Johnson persisted. He believed the story deserved to be told properly, not as wartime propaganda, not as Hollywood heroism, but as the true account of what one ordinary man had done under extraordinary circumstances. Johnson's book Phantom Warrior was finally published in 2007. It documented McKinney's childhood in Georgia, his service in the Pacific, and the battle that earned him the Medal of Honor. The book brought renewed attention to a hero most Americans had never heard of, but McKinney did not live to see it published. John Robert McKinney died on April 5, 1997, in Sylvania, Georgia. He was 76 years old. The sharecropper's son who had killed 56 Japanese soldiers with a rifle and his bare hands passed away quietly, surrounded by family in the same rural corner of Georgia where he had learned to hunt as a boy. He was buried in Scriven County, not far from the woods where he had spent his childhood, not far from the creeks where he had fished and the fields where he had worked. The Medal of Honor accompanied him to his grave. The highest honor the nation could give, finally at rest with the man who had earned it. 20 years after his death, Georgia honored him again. In 2017, the state legislature voted to rename a section of highway in Scriven County. It became the John R. McKinney Medal of Honor Highway. A ceremony was held. Veterans attended. The McKinney family accepted the honor on behalf of a man who had never sought recognition for what he did. The highway sign stands today. Drivers pass it every day without knowing the story behind the name. They do not know about the tent and the sword. They do not know about the machine gun and the 30 minutes. They do not know that the quiet farmer who once lived nearby had saved an entire company through an act of violence and courage that military historians still struggle to explain. And here is the detail that most people do not know. The twist that makes this story complete. When investigators examined the battlefield after the fight, they recovered Sergeant Fukutaro Mori's sword, the blade that had severed McKinney's ear, the weapon that had started everything. Standard procedure called for captured enemy equipment to be cataloged and shipped to intelligence units for analysis. But someone made a different decision. The sword was cleaned, documented, and eventually returned to McKinney as a war trophy. He brought it home to Georgia, along with his other possessions. For 50 years, that sword sat in the same house as the man it had nearly killed. McKinney never displayed it, never talked about it. But he kept it, perhaps as a reminder, perhaps as a trophy. Perhaps because throwing it away would have meant forgetting, and forgetting was impossible. When McKinney died, the sword passed to his family. It remains in their possession today. The weapon that launched one of the most extraordinary individual combat performances in military history, preserved by the family of the man who survived it. There is something profound in that detail. The attacker's sword kept by the defender's family. The instrument of intended murder transformed into a memento of survival. The physical evidence of a moment that changed everything passed down through generations who will never fully understand what their ancestor experienced that morning. From a sharecropper's son with a third-grade education to one of the most decorated soldiers of World War II. From a quiet farm boy who could barely read to a man whose actions saved dozens of American lives and influenced military doctrine for decades. From a tent in the Philippine jungle to a highway sign in rural Georgia. John McKinney never asked to be a hero. He was a hunter who joined the army because there was a war. He did what he had to do to survive and to protect the men sleeping around him. Then, he went home and tried to live a normal life, carrying memories that would never fully fade. 56 confirmed kills in 30 minutes. 1 rifle, 1 soldier. 1 morning that should have ended in massacre, but ended in something else entirely. The total impact of McKinney's stand cannot be measured precisely. The lives saved that morning, the supply route that remained open, the offensive that continued on schedule, the soldiers who went home to their families because one man refused to die. The ripples spread outward in ways that can never be fully calculated. But we know this much. When the Japanese attacked Company A on May 11, 1945, they expected to find sleeping Americans an easy victory. Instead, they found John McKinney. And that made all the difference. If this story moved you, if you felt something watching one ordinary man become extraordinary, then do us a favor. Hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We are rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about farm boys and privates who change history with rifles and bare hands. Real people. Real heroism. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from. United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Vietnam. Our community stretches across the entire world. You are not just viewers. You are part of keeping these memories alive. And if you know a similar story, a forgotten hero from your own family or your own country, share it in the comments. These men and women deserve to be remembered. Because John McKinney taught us something that applies far beyond the battlefield. Something that matters today as much as it mattered in 1945. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is a sharecropper's son with a severed ear picking up his rifle and walking toward the sound of gunfire. That is the story. That is the legacy. That is John McKinney. And now you will never forget his name.